and really source control, but primarily Git accessible for Salesforce developers as well as admins, with a little bit more focus today on admins. I think this is useful for both, but it will be kind of focused there. There is a Q&A kind of panel box, so as questions come up, please throw them in there, and then I will check them at the end, and we'll go ahead and answer whatever questions we may have time for at the end. So just to introduce myself, my name is Jack Moxon. I'm one of the founders of Blue Canvas. Prior to here, I was working at Sauce Labs as a product manager. So I've been in developer tooling for a long time. And I'm also kind of a novice and self-taught coder, which I think is somewhat appropriate because I'm not that comfortable with the command line. I think I know some things about coding and source control and best practices as a developer, but I'm not someone who has a CS degree or has worked with source control on large complicated projects. It's just on my own things. Quick word about Blue Canvas. We do source control as well as CI and continuous deployment, but we'll focus primarily on the source control and the Git infrastructure that we do. So the agenda today is to kind of walk through, really quickly why source control is important. We won't spend too much time on that because I think most people here know that. And we'll talk about why source control has been historically difficult for Salesforce. And then we'll talk a little bit about potential solutions, and then we'll get into a demo. So we'll do a minimal amount of slides where possible. So why source control? Well, the first reason I think most people are aware of in the Salesforce ecosystem is it prevents code clobbering. This is the term we use when we talk about someone logging into a sandbox or straight into production and making a change that just wipes out something that someone else had been working on. Or it can happen with a sandbox refresh, right? You refresh and all the work you've been doing for the last 3 weeks on a feature is gone. That's obviously not good. It's expensive and super annoying. Source control is also helpful because it's a source of truth. So kind of knowing, what's actually going on with your code is like very essential to kind of have that source of truth where you can go ahead and look at that. That relates into rollback. So with source control, you have snapshots of every previous stage of the application. So if a bug does get out, or you want to look at, hey, how did I do this last time, or whatever, you have these places to go and look. Which is also very useful with debugging. So even if there's not a rollback that you're going to do, but you just kind of want to understand, hey, this thing broke at 2 p.m. on last Thursday. This one functionality, what change got introduced at that time? And that relates back to the ability to audit and have visibility. Some of our customers are, working on SOX compliance. Some of them already are SOX compliance and trying to bring Salesforce into that. And so having, clear snapshots of what has changed and when, source control helps a lot with that. So, source control, I like to think of it as like, it's a giant safety net. Like, ideally, it's not something that you have to like think about a lot, but you're so happy when you have it. It's really a foundational tool for software development. So any team that's doing software development really needs to do it. But of course, I think I'm preaching to the choir with people who have joined this webinar. So let's get into the more interesting stuff. So why is source control so hard for Salesforce? Well, I think the first thing I want to acknowledge is that it's hard for every team. So this is one of my favorite Git memes. It comes from XKCD. I'll read it out here because it's a little bit hard to read. It's some people sitting at a computer, and one person says, "This is Git. It tracks collaborative work on projects through a beautiful distributed graph theory tree model." And then the colleagues say, "Cool, how do we use it?" And he says, "No idea. Just memorize these shell commands and type them to sync up. If you get errors, save your work elsewhere, delete the project, and download a fresh copy." And I love that because, like, on a lot of my own projects, that's sometimes how it feels. It's like, sometimes Git is working great for me, and it's, I kind of get the commit, I get the push, I get the pull, but if anything sort of untoward or unusual happens, I get very confused. And sometimes what I do is just, email myself the repo, delete the Git branch and like start over. And obviously that's not what Git is meant to do. But it made me happy to see that other software developers are having this problem as well. So it can be a little bit challenging in general. I think it's particularly challenging for Salesforce, right? Because one of the best things about Salesforce is that you have so many different user types. You've got, product managers, you've got developers, you've got admins, you've got marketing people, you have sales ops people, you have business analysts. There's so many people who can come in and like do different things, whether it's email templates or reports or dashboards or Apex code or triggers or workflow rules or Visualforce pages. I mean, obviously there's millions of different types of components, and not to mention like, custom fields and objects and managed packages. And there's just so much going on. It's like more complex, I think, than the average. And it's also complex in terms of the types of roles involved in there, right? And so that also tails into commitment. So you might have a developer who comes in and works on Salesforce every single day. You might have an admin who does, about that much, but who's also has a responsibility with ServiceNow or some other things. So they're not 100% into Salesforce. And then you might have people coming in like in, sales ops, and once a month making some kind of minor change that is affecting other people's work. And it is like creating dependencies that are important for deployments and for the life cycle. But, and then of course, different people make different decisions about which, things to bring in from the app exchange and other places. So there's just a lot of complexity going on with the teams. Of course, you have the declarative versus the code. So, some people never ever touch the command line or Apex code. It's all declarative UI stuff. And then, code changes, and doing those things are really different with how you want to approach source control. And then of course, all of that leads into issues people have with the command line. So, on the right here, we have the Salesforce DX CLI that we're looking at. And, I think some people are really excited about this, and other people are a little bit afraid. Or I've even heard one woman told me that, she's been a developer for like 20 years, and it used to be all command line. And then, companies went into the UI side of things because they realized it was better. And then now, some hipsters are bringing us back to the command line, which I thought was funny. I think there's definitely great things about the command line, but it can be challenging. So that's something that people want to know about. And then, I think the Salesforce APIs, I think we all know, we work with them a lot here at Blue Canvas. They don't do a lot of favors. There's a lot of, missing parts or challenges. So these are some of the specific reasons that it can be difficult. I want to just take a really quick look at how I think people do sandbox development today. This is kind of a traditional standard model. So we've got, a few different developer orgs where people make changes, and then they use a change set or like some kind of sandbox refresh to push the code into, say, an integration environment, up to staging, and up to production. And I think a lot of people have maybe little variations on this, but this is kind of common. And this is for a team that's probably not using much in the way of source control. For teams that want to add on source control on top of that, it kind of complicates the view. So on the bottom in the orange, we have our Salesforce environments. So these are changes that people make. But on the top here, we have this new layer, which we call kind of your Git branches, right? And so you might have different features that are kind of overlapping and belong on different dev environments. But as you can see, they're not actually connected in any way. It's completely separate and floating on top. And we'll talk a little bit more on the solution side about how integrating these things is helpful. But they're kind of sitting up there on their own, and then use the command line to push them up to another branch called integration, which corresponds to this other org called integration. But of course, you can see there's no connection between these two, right? And same for staging. And then, most challenging, you got master floating here, which is a Git branch, and then what's going on in production. And these things are never connected. And so people can log in at any stage of the process and make a change to production. They can make a change to staging. They can make a change to integration. And that change may not show up in source control. And pretty soon your source control gets further and further apart, and it would be off the slide, the distance between these things. So that's one problem. A second problem is that when they're kind of separated in this way, your deployment and your source control, there is no concept of using Salesforce dependency analysis in gating your Git pushes and Git merges. And we're going to talk in more detail about that. But what I mean by that is that, Git is actually pretty welcoming, right? It's going to accept anything. Any change you make, it will accept. Salesforce, on the other hand, can be a little bit more tricky, as all of us who have tried to deploy with Ant scripts or with a change set, we know, right? So sometimes something you want to deploy won't deploy cleanly because you have to make some other changes. And so that's another factor which like drives these things apart. So your source control starts to look really different in integration versus what your actual integration org says, let alone production and master. These things look very, very different. And when you want to, resolve something or get the benefits of source control with, rollback or backup or, the ability to look at that source of truth, you don't know which one is a source of truth. Is it master? Is it production? Who knows? Okay, so those are some of the challenges. I'm sure you guys have seen others, but those are the ones that we kind of see on a regular basis. How do I get to a practical solution? And I think practical is the key point. So there are many, many options and ideas, but what you want to do is find something that really is likely to work and likely to stick with your team. We've had a lot of companies come to us because they've tried some various like ad hoc solutions and they haven't always worked. So the first step is automation. We find that automating everything you can in this process makes it much more likely to stick. So obviously, number one, it removes kind of the manual steps that tend to be error prone, but also makes it easier for people who don't contribute all the time. So if you're a sales ops person or a admin who's got multiple responsibilities, having them learn like Git, which is hard enough for all of us, is a little bit unrealistic. And so kind of automating that where you can is really good. And then it just makes life easier for people who are, committing every day when you can automate a lot of steps. And obviously automation also helps like ensure that, everything is there at all times. So Salesforce has so many different dependencies. You kind of need all that metadata, declarative and code, because they interact with each other. You need them both in source control. And so what we see with a lot of teams is that the developer team actually is pretty good about, using Git and is able to kind of, make that happen. But a lot of their declarative work is completely divorced from that. And so when they try to do deployments or try to use, source control in a meaningful way, about half of their metadata just like isn't really accurate. It's not up to date. It isn't there. So automating that helps ensure that, dependencies between declarative and code are united on the source control front. And to that end, we talked about in that graph, like the difference between, source control living kind of on the separate plane above and unrelated and completely divorced from your actual Salesforce environments. We think it's really important to link source control to deployments. So those things should be together, and we're going to show that in the demo. So changes that happen in source control should be reflected in your orgs and vice versa. So if someone does log into production and do a quick hotfix, that needs to get into source control somehow. So how do you make that happen? We recommend keeping it very simple with a one branch, one org model. It's the simplest way, I think, to get especially like declarative code and admins like reliably into a source control tool. So basically each of your environments, whether it's a sandbox or a production org or a developer edition org, whatever, should kind of correspond to a branch. And that way, everything that's in that org is what's live in the branch at all times. And that's going to make things a lot simpler for you going forward. You can do feature branching and lots of other things, but at least making sure that every org and every environment has at least one branch attached to it. And then finally, making sure that dependency analysis is a part of your Git push step. So when you're going to push in source control, it makes a lot of sense to make sure that like what you're pushing will actually be accepted by the org. What you don't want to do is push everything in Git and then spend 2-3 hours doing a change set or an ant script and like tweaking different things and getting dependencies all set up, and then your dependency tree is very different between what's in source control and in your environment. And then generally, like we recommend open tooling. Like we think there's so many awesome things that have happened in developer tooling outside of Salesforce for a long time. So Git is one example of that. In that alone is like a really great tool that plugs into lots of other tools. So you can work with things that other software best practices use. So like Trello and Jira and Visual Studio from Microsoft. There's lots of different things you can do. Okay, so enough of my slideware. Let's jump into an actual demo, which will be kind of more interactive. So let's switch over here. So I'm now in Blue Canvas, and you can see here like a really simple kind of developer like pipeline. So there are 3 columns. Now everyone's going to have different kind of setups. They have a production org over here. I've got a couple different in my UAT environment. So like there could be staging, and I have a dev hub, but you could also have multiple steps here, and you can have multiple, Salesforce developer orgs as well. In this simple demo, we just have one, and we're going to kind of walk through kind of a version of getting all of this stuff into Git in an automated way. And then we're going to talk about how it links into external tools. Like in this case, we're going to talk about Visual Studio Team Services, but you could do a lot of what I'm going to show you with GitHub or Bitbucket or any other tools. And we have public like blog posts and documentation about that. So if anyone's interested on following up, we can go into that later. So, so the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit more about that one branch, one org model. So we think it makes sense to basically say, okay, this dev environment needs to have its own kind of dedicated branch, and anything that happens in that environment should be automatically pushed into that branch at all times. So what does that look like? So, well, first of all, in the Blue Canvas model, we make it simple because we have an automated OAuth connection. So if you want to create a new branch, you just say new org, tell if it's a sandbox, production, or developer edition. In this case, we'll say sandbox. And then you would just log in to whatever of your sandboxes you have here. And once that's done, we have created a tool that allows you to connect. Now I'm not going to do that since I've already set that up, but that's kind of how we handle our like one branch, one org. And then any changes, like I said, that happen. So let's log into this dev hub. So I'm actually logged in as the user Michael Jordan, and I'm going to open up the developer console. And as Michael Jordan, I'm just going to make a new comment. So webinar comment for Thursday, almost Friday. Great. Okay, so I'll click on save. And in this case, for the demo and for simplicity, I'm using the developer console. But all the principles I'm talking about here apply if you're using Illuminated Cloud or the Welcome Suite or Maven's Mate or Eclipse. It doesn't matter, same concept. So once I click save here, I don't have to go to the command line. We've already written a script that basically goes into the Salesforce APIs and pushes that directly into the Git branch, okay? But it's not just going to be code changes that happens for. It's also going to be declarative stuff. So let's go into setup here, and let's find a simple workflow rule. And don't show this again. And we've got a rule here. So let's go and just change, for simplicity, this field to owner and equals and webinar, I don't know, Tony Kukoc. I don't know how to spell that, but we'll save that. Okay, and we'll call that done. So that sort of simulates like what an admin might be doing with their work. And again, kind of crucial that like they don't have to do anything else. A, they don't have to remember anything new. B, they don't have to learn a new like process. You just want it like when it's saved, you want that to show up in source control automatically, because if it's not automated in that way, it's unlikely to believe that it's going to happen any other way. So now I can log in and I can actually see what's going on here. So I can click in, and it's just a standard Git repository here that we have in Blue Canvas. So we can see what's going on here. So I have like all the different metadata that you might want to look at. So different classes, objects, workflows. And Blue Canvas handles not just standard metadata, but also custom objects and things like that. So that's all there. You can click on classes here, and we can actually log into this particular class. And you can look at the changes here. So this is like what the class looks like before we made that change. Nothing too exciting, but with Git, you can actually see a full history of that here. So you can see like how that has changed over time. I can click on, and you can see these things. At the bottom here, you can see actually different users are making changes to it over time. So if I click on this, I can see Scotty Pippin, who is another user, and you can see the change that he made. So I added a comment and changed this line of code, and you can see the username. So, you know, one nice thing about how Blue Canvas handles this is we actually go ahead and grab this stuff like automatically. We're actually able to grab the specific change as well as the specific username. One second. Okay, so that's the step one here. So that's going on. Let's see here. And I'm getting a chat. Just want to check on that. Okay, so yeah, we'll answer questions towards the end just so we can keep the flow going. And okay, so that's what we're doing there. If I go back here, we can also show you what's going on there. And then there's also this concept called git blame, which is okay, so you can actually, it's kind of a harsh term, but it's kind of nice. So for debugging, you can see actually line by line, like how the class looks today. And you can see, okay, line 1, and you can see Michael Jordan, you know, kind of created the class, but you can also see Scottie Pippen came in and made some different changes. So those were all going going there. So that's kind of useful. And it's nice, like not to use the word blame, but just to be able to kind of, you know, check on things. So we had a question there, why it's not showing our change. It looks like the org that I connected is actually not syncing right now. So we're looking into that right now. And I don't know what the issue is, but yeah, so theoretically Blue Canvas polls every minute. And so it would actually go ahead and show that, that change typically automatically. So I'm going to look into what's going on with that, but thanks for bearing with us. But that's basically what goes on. So that should be connected automatically. Let's see. We also can look at, you know, the workflows, for example. So this is actually a bad example. Let's go to the play workflow, which is kind of a more custom one. And we can see the history on this one and how it's changed over time. So I can say like, you know, if we're changing a value, we can actually see that as well and who actually did it. So again, it kind of gives you that visibility, which is really nice and quite useful. You also have a nice activity stream here of like all the changes that are happening over time. So looks like our change finally did come through. So the webinar comment for Thursday and the change, you know, to Tony Kukoc for the ownership thing shows up there as well. So we can see that in the activity stream, and this is great for getting more visibility into like, you know, what's going on with your team overall. So like a lot of our users enjoy that. So you can kind of see this stuff going on. We also have the ability to look for history. So just like on a specific org, you know, what happened over time. So different things that have happened. So 2 days ago, I can see Michael Jordan change the account workflow, and I can look in that in more detail. So now everything is syncing. We can see our change has come through. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly. We go to classes and we'll see that. We'll see that our changes are there. If we look at history, that's going to show up as well. So that's all there. Okay, so that's kind of step one. So getting things into Git automatically, and again, emphasizing that making that automated helps a lot in terms of making it more realistic for people to like reliably stick with that stuff. And that's kind of phase one. So how do we then bring that stuff into other environments? So one of the nice things about using Git is that you can plug it into other tools. We have these command line instructions. So everything that we've done is not requiring you to know anything about Git. So your team doesn't need to know any of this stuff, but you can then set it up with other tools. So what I'll show you next is how we plug this stuff into um, VSTS. So I'm logged into Visual Studio Team Services here. You can actually see that it's just like what we have, previously. This is our class, and I'm able to look at all the same data from the comfort of my Visual Studio Team Services. You can even see that it's already picked up the change webinar comment for Thursday and the change that that we made. So I can look at Get Blame in this view. And again, it's the same idea. So that's one of the nice things about using open tooling is you can do all these things. There's a couple ways that we can do that. So I could have just pushed into VSTS here, but what I've actually set up is a job that is a build step. And what this build step does is actually listens for changes and pushes them. And I'm just going to show you that really quickly. We have full documentation for like how to do this with VSTS and with GitHub and other services. But you can see here, all I've basically done is set up a simple tool where I can actually do a git checkout. I run git pull. And so we just use the blue canvas username and password, which we've set up as environment variables. And we push it to the relevant branch when we're done. And that's about it. So basically in about 5 minutes, you can set up this build step in VSTS. You can set up a blue canvas account so that things are automatically getting brought in. And then next thing you know, phase one of your task is complete. So all changes are automatically synced in Git. And the ability to kind of keep this, keep this up and keep admins actually using it is very solid. So what else can you do with Git though, right? So because everything is Git based, you can have the ability to do Git diffs. So I'm going to show how we can actually compare the differences between two orgs. So let's say we want to see how is my developer branch different than my staging environment, for example. I can click on Git compare, and this will go ahead and show me like all the differences between the orgs. So you can see there's actually 156 different files between them, and you can actually see, like for example, on this play class, how this is different. And we also have a nice side-by-side view here, which is useful. And you can see them now side by side. So you can see like the left side is one. Now Blue Canvas handles destructive changes. So these red ones are deletions. It also handles creating things here. So you can see that. The next step of source control is going to be deploying and moving code from one environment to another, right? And making sure that merge conflicts don't happen. So let's show that. So we have a concept which we call a deployment request, which is very similar to a pull request in Git. So in this case, I'm going to give this a title, which is webinar deploy, and we'll write includes play class change and workflow. Right, and then these are actually automatically generated. So again, about automation between everything. It's great to have this automated. So instead of like manually deciding, hey, what did I change in the last 3 weeks? This is just going to show you what's different and what has changed on your org versus where you're trying to deploy. So in this case, I'm actually going to just select the play class and the play workflow, which are the ones we modified, and we'll leave everything out for now. So you have the ability to kind of really easily cherry pick. And we'll create a new deployment request. So this is kind of where we can talk back again, where we talked in the presentation about having your source control and your deployments and your source control and your environments linked in a more tight way. So again, in the same way with Blue Canvas, where whenever we're detecting any changes in the orgs, we're committing that automatically to a branch. And here's the same side where, so if we ever like push from one branch to another, we're going to deploy that in the org so that everything that's in source control is actually going on in the environments. And you get a couple benefits from that. Number one, by linking these steps, we're going to run through a few steps here before we do any of that to make sure that it's smart and safe to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is worry about code clobbering. So in order to avoid code clobbering, we want to look for merge conflicts. So merge conflicts arise when someone has changed the target org, in this case, staging. So let's say somebody had gone into staging and just updated some of the files that we want to change or some of the components without us knowing. In the old ways or with the change set, what would happen is you would just go ahead and deploy that and it would just completely cleanly wipe out everything that that they have worked on. And that's obviously not necessarily a good thing. And so we want to avoid that. There's also, the possibility of that happening through a sandbox refresh or something, because Blue Canvas does, both directions. So, we want to avoid that. So what this is looking for right now in the preparation step is, are there any, merge conflicts that we need to be aware of? And then once that is complete, it's going to look for any validation issues, right? So kind of like a Salesforce quick deploy, where it actually just runs a validation to make sure that all dependencies and whatnot are safe. So we need to be aware of that as well. And then, if there are dependencies that aren't there, instead of just pushing to Git and then letting those things get divorced from each other, what it's going to do is listen and say, hey, before you push this in the source control, let's make sure that these things, work correctly with Salesforce's metadata kind of dependency tree. So this will take just another second. Okay, so it looks like we have an error. This deployment has merge conflicts that must be resolved. So this is to show you guys kind of what happens when there are conflicts. So it looks like someone has gone into staging and made a change that we weren't aware of. So I can click on resolve them, and right away we can see really simply, and this is the beauty of Git, we can see the differences, right? So the changes that we made are here, which is the webinar comment for Thursday and new class. I know these are really simple examples, but hopefully you can see why this is quite valuable. And in the target org, someone had gone in and changed this and made a change directly in staging, right? So with Blue Canvas, this is again nice, not having to go to the command line. We can just select between these two. So we can say keep original or keep changes. In this case, I think we should keep the changes. We're going to mark it as resolved, and then we're going to continue on with the deployment request. Again, that's a really nice safety check that a lot of teams don't have in place today. And that will save you big time talking about that safety net when you have something. So that's one thing. You can also see, just while we're waiting for this to run again, the files change. So we can see here, we were able to cherry pick successfully. So it's really only deploying these two classes. This is great for code reviews and things. And you can see that it's all validated and passed now that we got through that stage. So you have this opportunity to have discussions down here. So, and you can even see that it resolved the merge conflicts, previously, but I can write comments like, why did you change that field? And I can go ahead and add it as a comment, which is nice. We even have emoji support. So if you want to add a, I don't know, person running or something, you can, playing basketball. So that's really nice. So teams that want to incorporate more code reviews into their tool can do that. Release managers can go into the deploy tab here. You can see things that have already been deployed. So you can look at this and say, okay, this was the initial setup, it looks like. It included a bunch of different changes. So the original creation of the play class, the layout associated, the object that it was associated with, and the workflow. So I can see all these things historically, which is great for auditing, debug, and rollback. And then when things are open, you see them here. So you can come in and say, okay, what's the webinar deploy situation? Okay, it's not yet deployed. It's ready in blue. I can go ahead and deploy it. I can actually edit the files and remove things if I want to. I can read the discussion of what are people saying about this deployment. I can see specifically which files have changed. I can even look and see the package XML that's been generated. And again, Blue Canvas, if there were destructive, like a deletion, we would also create destructive changes here. And that's all done automatically. So again, lots of automation, lots of stuff going on behind the scenes, which makes it a lot easier to bring people into the flow. And again, so there's kind of a couple phases here. So the first phase is setting up the Blue Canvas or some sort of automatic syncing system, pointing that into your Git repository, in this case VSTS in a simple way. Going ahead and having the ability to kind of see the blame and the history and all that stuff is useful. Comparing and seeing Git diff is really nice. And then having, merge conflict detection and dependency analysis built into your deployment step so that all of your Git merges and all of your deployments are kind of on the same page. So we'll come back to the slides just for a second here. So we had the nice live demo. So here's what it looks like, in our vision of with Blue Canvas. So we have now changed kind of our model. So each of these circles is both a Git branch and a Salesforce environment. So different than before. And that just kind of unifies the whole process, right? So we have developer orgs and branches where we're making changes. We're pushing those via the one-click deployment that I showed you guys into the integration and onward up to staging. And you see that it's bi-directional, right? So you can go downstream as well. So you can refresh things and refresh metadata without touching the data or wiping out changes. So you can see all this stuff going on. We've also included up here just the future of Salesforce development is with DX, right? So there are Scratch orgs, which are available, and we have a beta of a integration with Scratch org, which looks extremely similar. It basically lets you with one click spin up a Scratch org, and it has the same automatic syncing feature that you've seen, and allows you to deploy actually between Scratch orgs and developer or sandboxes, which isn't very easy to do because they have different directory structures. We handle that stuff automatically for you. So this is kind of the simplified, automated, unified view. And closing with another meme, I don't always write Salesforce code, but when I do, I use Git. And I'm now going to move over to the question panel so we can answer some of the questions that I think saw pop up in the chat. So let me go up here and just start with the webinar chat. So the first one I see says, can we have a combination of automatically pulling from Sandbox to repo as well as having manual push from Git to Sandbox instead? Yes, so you want to have, if I understand this correctly, so automatically pulling from the Sandbox, which is what we kind of showed you. Yes, you can, and then you want to push from Git into the Sandbox as well. I think I hopefully showed the way that Blue Canvas handles that with kind of a one-quick deployment model. So there's that. On our future roadmap is the ability to actually expose the command line, so you can actually do like a git push Salesforce branch name and have it deploy as well. That's where we're kind of moving towards. Let's see, I saw a question about the change that we made didn't show up. That was just because of a quick syncing error, but we got that resolved, and that went ahead and finished. Another question was if it's automatically behind the scenes that I don't have control over Git commits. This is a great question. So yeah, sometimes you might be working on a class and you don't want it committing every single hour, right? We totally understand that. And so we have a roadmap feature where we're going to allow you to have more control over the commit itself. Right now, we have people who tend to use the deployment as a way to kind of clean that stuff up. So you might have a lot of commits going on in your developer sandbox, and then when you do the deployment, you kind of squash it all into one, and it makes it up the chain that way. You can also like customize and change the like sync frequency of the branch. So you know, if you want to say, hey, I want to wait 2 hours because I'm going to be working on this class for a while, that's something that you can do. Let's see, if we want to build automatically but at a certain interval of time whenever we feel that code is reliable to go to Git. Yeah, so if I understand this question correctly, there's a couple things. So one, yeah, we can change the sync time that are happening on your org, so you don't want it to happen every minute. So you can do it that way. And if I also might be understanding, the question might be about like, can I deploy automatically, you know, on Fridays at 2 p.m. and have that kind of scheduling? We don't have that today, but that's something that, you know, if customers want, it's pretty easy for us to add that in. Yeah, so someone said like changes in the editor will go to the Salesforce environment. Yes, exactly. This is very similar to like how, you know, Maven's Mate might work. And it's also, we integrate seamlessly with things like Maven's Mate, because if you save something in Maven's Mate to an org, Blue Canvas will just pick that up. We're completely agnostic, and we don't necessarily care, you know, the difference between things. Question about search for specific changes. So there is sort of limited search functionality in Blue Canvas today. One nice thing about being kind of Git based is you can, there's a bunch of Git tools out there that you can use to like search and look at things. You know, Source Tree from Atlassian is a free tool. This is really good. You can also push it into like VSTS code, which is, you know, what I showed you guys as well, and or GitHub, and use all their search functionalities, which is quite nice. We're actually on our roadmap as well, working on some UI changes, so filtering and sorting, and there's lots of cool things coming down the pipeline in terms of like how you're able to slice your metadata and look at it. Question about Maven's Mate with Sublime Text. Absolutely. think I covered that. You can work on those things together. How can I easily find my recent changes? Great question. The activity stream is probably the best place to do that, or the history for a different org. So you can actually, the activity stream, it's very similar to history, but activity is for all of your connected branches, just like a running stream in real time of, who's changing what and when. The history is a little bit more granular because it's just looking for one branch at a time. So you can go there and you can quickly see, okay, 15 minutes ago I did this, 2 days ago I did that. That's all there. Let's see. Do we have any rollback option after a certain deployment? So because of Salesforce's dependencies, there's not necessarily like an easy, just like rollback to previous commit. That's something that we want to have and are working towards, but isn't there today. So in terms of rollback, what you have is the Git history. You can use that Git history to figure out, how you want to roll back, make the changes, and do the rollback. Let's see. Changes to metadata can become pretty complex and touch many files. Do you recommend creating deployment requests after each feature change to keep the changed files organized? That's a great question. I think we've seen people be successful with both. I think the more granular you can do, so like I think a general best practice for Git and for source control is like small modular little commits. And that's a big part of like what DX is heading towards, right? Is kind of breaking up these monoliths. So, if you make a feature change and you're able to make a deployment request, that's the best thing you can do, right? Because that makes rollback and searchability like much easier, and it makes it a lot simpler to do that. Okay, so I was asked to repeat the questions more slowly. Some are sent only to you and we don't have the visual to back it up. Sorry, I thought everyone could see everything. Yes, I will ask more slowly. Question 1. Can you integrate the why the change was made with the what was the exact change made that your tool provides? For example, can you integrate Jira, Agile, Accelerator, cases, other ways that teams track the things that they do? That's a great question. I'll answer in 2 parts. One is yes, you can. We have in Blue Canvas these deployment requests which have a unique URL. And so what a lot of teams are doing today is posting that URL in their Jira tickets, for example, as a comment or as a change saying, hey, yes, this change was made and it's associated with this deployment request, right? And you have the ID. And so someone can go into Jira, click on the deployment request ID and see the diff and see what's included. You can see any comments there as well. We also have people doing the opposite. So in the deployment request idea in Blue Canvas, in the title, you can write whatever you like. So sometimes people write a longer description about what has changed. Sometimes they put a Jira ticket number or other ticket numbers for whatever you might be using. They'll put that in the deployment request, and that makes it very searchable and easy to associate things back as well. In the future, we do want to do an integration specifically with Jira or other tools. We don't have that today. People are using the workarounds that I described, but absolutely. And that's, again, Blue Canvas is built on kind of open tools and open tooling. So I think building these integrations will be relatively straightforward and super valuable. Okay, another question was, do we need our own Git repo? That's a great question and definitely kind of source of confusion for many. You do not need your own Git repo. So I showed pushing that into a VSTS repo, but Blue Canvas is itself a Git repository. So many of our customers do not use any external Git. They just rely on Blue Canvas because it's much simpler. And that's one of the nice things about our tool is you sign up within 5 minutes, you've connected your orgs, and basically you've set up a much better system for keeping things safe and code safe. How would you going to deploy if the schedule batch Apex class in target org already in execution mode and you need to deploy that class? That is a question I may need to take offline because I don't know if I fully understand or know the question or know the answer. So maybe if you email team@bluecanvas.io, I can go ahead and get that answered for you. Question 2, How does this tool handle permissions changes that can be more inconsistent in how they show up in the SF audit trail? For example, how does it handle updates to field level security for newly added fields? That is a great question. So today we are not tracking that level of detail. We have a list of kind of the which metadata types are supported and which are not on our docs. So I encourage people to go check that out. We are planning to focus on that in the near future. It's kind of one of the top roadmap items that we want to add. So providing more granularity about, field level security and things like that. So short answer is today it's not supported. So that would be something you would need to track and handle on your own. But it's something that is very much a high priority. So we're hoping to do that in the next couple of months. Okay, and then I see a QA panel as well. Let's see. Let's see. So this way you don't have to make feature branches. It simply syncs it to the dev branch. That's correct. You don't have to make feature branches with this. That's correct. So by using Blue Canvas, you don't need to use source tree. That is also correct. You do not need to use source tree. You can if you want to. And I think we have a blog post from our early blog about how to integrate those things if you want to. But yes, the idea is to kind of make it so that you don't necessarily have to do that. Let's see. Does Blue Canvas provide the Git repo, or do I need VSTS GitHub? I think I answered that. Blue Canvas does provide the Git repo, although we also allow you to do both. Do you support other hosted Git repositories other than your Blue Canvas Git installation? What does that look like? Yeah, so I think we covered that in the sense that you can push those things into other repos. We also do offer like a private cloud setting. So obviously all of our repos are highly secure and private, but if you do need like basically like an on-prem thing, you can email team@bluecanvas.io and we can talk through what that setup looks like. Can Blue Canvas help me find my recent changes to make deployments easier? I often lose track of everything I built during a sprint when I need to deploy. Usually I keep a rolling list of changes and continually add to it. Absolutely. So this is one of the things that we try to provide as well. So if you saw in the comparison view, it shows you, back and forth, the differences. So you're able to see those things like instantly. So we automatically show like, okay, here's what the target org looks like, and here's how my developer branch has changed since then. And we make that very simple. Let's see. Does deployments include profiles, and can we exclude if so? As I mentioned before, profiles are not included. That's something that we'll be adding and making that optional in the future. Let's see, a few more jumping in. Do we have discounts for nonprofits? Yes, we do. Follow-up question to a question above. Does this mean we cannot decide that we want our code to only sit in our private repositories? So yes, so as I mentioned, if you are using Blue Canvas, then there is some access that we would have to your code, and we have our own hosted repository. We do have some enterprise solutions like around that. So kind of like on-prem or private. I mean, everything is private, but on-prem or extra private cloud is another option as well. So definitely reach out to team@bluecanvas.io if you are interested in that. Okay, so let's see. I think we are now getting close to kind of the end in terms of time. So if you have other questions, I'd ask you to just email me at team@bluecanvas.io, and we'll have someone on the team get back to you as soon as possible. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for joining. I hope that this was interesting and useful for everybody, and we had a lot of fun doing it with you guys. So, get to my thank you slide. You can contact us, as I mentioned, on our website or through this email address, team@bluecanvas.io. Okay. Oh, and last question. I will definitely be sharing out this video. So if you have people on your team that couldn't make it, we will get that out to you as well. So Thanks, everyone. It was a ton of fun, and sorry we couldn't get to every single question, but please do reach out, and we'll get back to you. All right. Thanks, everyone.